In this video, we're going to take a look at Spotlight and see how we can take that tool and use it to create textures inside of ZBrush. So in an earlier video, we took a look at Spotlight and we were taking some color swatches that we were making inside of Photoshop and bringing that over. So the process to bring textures inside the program is going to be very similar. So we're going to go to the Texture tab. I'm just going to go ahead and click this button here to dock it, or I can click and drag that over and dock it over here into this slot. Let me go ahead and close this stroke and transform. The next thing I'm going to do is load up the textures. So I'm going to say texture, and then I'm going to go import, and then it's going to ask me to navigate to where my textures are. So I've got a folder that's got a bunch of different textures in here, so I'll go ahead and just load up some of the different textures that I have. And so I'm going to hold down Control and just click on these, a little more careful this time, and hit open, and it's going to throw all these different textures in here. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of the textures, any one of them will do, and I'll go ahead and say add to Spotlight. Okay, I'll go ahead and click this over here, and then I'm going to keep adding these to Spotlight. So I'm going to click on the next one, add to Spotlight, add to Spotlight, add to Spotlight, until I have all of them added to Spotlight. Okay, now I'm going to hit the comma key to get rid of this light box. And then if I click and drag out away from any of these images, I can move the entire image as a bunch here. Or if I click on one of them, I can move them individually, like so, and I can kind of position them around on the canvas however I want. And then whenever you actually select one, you're going to be able to do things like we've already looked at, scaling it down. We could rotate this. So I'm going to put that back to its original position. Some of the other things that we're going to be able to do, we could take a look at this tile proportional. So if I click that, you can see it's going to tile everything proportional over here. If I say tile selected, it's going to tile everything, and then have one of the image that I have selected here tile unified, so it's going to give the same size for everything here. So at that point I could move these all around. We could scale everything down at the same time and kind of just push it off to the side. So I'm going to switch off this model that I have here. I'm going to clear the canvas real quick. Control N will clear the canvas off, and then I'm going to go to my subtool section, and at the bottom of the stack around there is what I've got called this dirt mound, and I'm going to go ahead and hit solo, so I'm just looking at just the dirt for this. And if I tap Z, that's going to put me in a mode where I'm going to go back and I'm kind of pushing and pulling my model around. So you can see this is all going to stay up here. We're going to hit Shift Z to hide or unhide these things, and then Z to go into the actual texturing mode where we're kind of got this tool set here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this dirt, and then I'm going to scale this thing up quite a bit like this. Okay, and then if I tap Z, I'll take this off here, and I'll get my regular brush. I'm going to put it on RGB and turn Z add off. So now I can click and drag on here, and I'm actually drawing on there. If I hit Shift Z, you can see we're going to hide this. So I'm going to bring everything back, tap Z, and something else that we can do is do this spotlight radius. So I can take the opacity, I'll drag this down quite a bit, just so I can kind of barely see the texture, and then I'll do this spotlight radius, and you can see how far I can kind of drag this out. So now when I tap Z, it's going to give me this this kind of like flashlight kind of look, and then wherever I paint, it's going to lay down, you know, the full paint. But then I can kind of move this thing around and everything kind of gets hidden unless I put this over there. That's happening with that spotlight radius. This other thing we can do is say pen spotlight, and if we do that, I'll tap Z. You can see the texture moves around with my brush. So that might come in handy, because then that way I can kind of just take this whole texture and kind of push it around on the object, like so. And I can try to find any kind of areas that I might want to texture from a different angle. So that's going to get me some looks that is going to be like this dirt. So if I hit Shift Z and then Tab Z to bring everything back, then I can go ahead and pick one of these other textures. So I'll pick this, take this and scale this thing down. And I could just do the tile unified again, and that's going to put everything at the same size there. So this one was a leather texture. I think I wanted to get this wood grain over here. So I'll take this and scale this up a little bit, like this. I can make it larger. Something else that we can do, let me go ahead and take the opacity up so we can see this, see what's going on. There is a tile V, so we could tile this thing and make the wood grain tighter, the wood planks, and there's a tile this way as well, to where we could tile it going this way. So now that I've got that, I could kind of move this thing around and maybe drop down the opacity again to where it's kind of just a little bit visible. I do have this pen spotlight on. I'll turn that off so that way the boards stay exactly where they're at. And then I'll just tap Z and I'll take my brush size down a little bit like this, and let me just hit Z again. I'm going to take the spotlight radius and drag that down to about here. So tap Z again. I think I want to move this back just a little bit, so I'll tap Z and then I'll just click and drag this to where this edge is right here. Tap Z again. Now I'm ready to paint on here. So now I can kind of just paint in as if these wooden planks are kind of interacting with this dirt. And if I make my brush size a little bit smaller like this, then I can get a look that the dirt's clumping up a little bit higher at that point. So I'll tap Shift Z to take away all the spotlight tool, and I'll just go ahead and hit solo and bring back my character. And you can see that's how we can quickly use a bunch of different textures and use spotlight, and we're actually painting directly on this model with poly paint at that point. So I'll just go ahead and hit Shift R to do a little quick test render just to see how things look. And that should throw that on there. While it's rendering, I could just talk to you real quick about some of the other things that we looked at in the videos, where if we wanted to take these textures and do any kind of color correction with them, it's in the poly paint mode. In the other videos we looked at how we can take poly paint, and if you have UVs on your model, you can go to the texture map and say create, and you can say new from poly paint, and that's going to make a new texture for us. At that point, whenever we go to the texture tool that we docked over here, we can go into here and we actually need to clone that texture to get it into the texture tab. So let me go back down here, say clone texture. Once we clone that texture, it's going to be available for us in the texture slot, and then we can add that to Spotlight, and we can start doing different adjustments to this texture itself. So if I take the opacity of this and drag it all the way up, like right now it's pretty light, so I could take the intensity on this and kind of drop it down a little bit like this. Okay, and then at that point I'll just tap Z and hit Shift Z to go out of the tool. So then this is my new dirt map here. Let me just go ahead and select it, and then I'll come down here to this texture here, and I'll select this new dirt one, and you can see everything kind of darkened up quite a bit. So that's how we can push this to polypaint to texture, and then if we want to get that back to polypaint, we could do this. We could turn the texture off just so you can see the difference here, and we can say polypaint from texture, and that's going to convert this texture information to polypaint information. Okay, so that's going to give you a little workflow there that you're going to be able to use the Spotlight tool. You're going to be able to paint, and using polypaint, you'll be able to take that and push that to texture if you need to. Then if you need to do any kind of adjustments to that, you can push that to Spotlight and do the adjustments with the Spotlight tool as well. There's just a few little things that I want to talk about with Spotlight real quick before we end this video segment. So we're already looking at if we've got this texture made that we've made from Polypaint. We just went down here and do texture and say new from Polypaint. Then we can select the texture and say clone texture. Then that's going to put it in this area right here. So I can select that, and I can actually add that to Spotlight. And once I have that added to Spotlight, I can go ahead and turn this on. Now if I tap Z, that's going to bring up all the different tools that we've got for this. I wanted to show you there's a tool within here that is called Clone. So if you click on Clone, and let me take this off for the texture over here, I can position this thing anywhere I want. So let's say I want to clone this little piece of this rock here. I can come over here. Now at this point I'll turn off Z add, just make sure I'm painting with RGB, and then now I can actually start to use that as a clone source. So if I wanted to get this rock here, then I can paint that in right in there, and I can keep kind of painting around at that point. Okay, and keep filling out this texture. So I'm going to go ahead and erase all the wood that I've painted on here. Okay, so here is the clone tool. Now beyond this, there's something else that I wanted to show you, which was we've got a primary and a secondary color here, and we can actually go, and there is a paint. Let me go ahead and put this on the texture itself. So I just clicked on that, and then we go to paint, and if we drag, let's see, to the right, it's going to fill with the foreground color like this. If we drag to the left, it's going to fill with the secondary color like that. Okay, so I'm going to take this back and hit undo, and then I think I want to change this color to less saturation, make it just a little bit darker. So then I'll click and drag out with this, and I think it's still going to make it just a little bit darker. Then drag out with that like that. Okay, so I can just tap Z to get rid of the manipulator for the tool for Spotlight, and then hit Shift Z to turn that off. And now whenever I go to find my textures here and I click on this dirt, it should update with these new changes that we have made. Okay, so I guess beyond this, if I wanted to take this dirt and I wanted to take this final resulting texture and do something with it and change the shape of things, I wanted to show you guys real quick what we can do here for that. So we've already got this should be in the texture area. So we can go to the texture, and we can say from here, we'll have to select a texture and then say make alpha. So it's going to make an alpha from the texture that we have, which will make this right here. Then at that point we could go to the masking area. So we're going to go open up masking. Let me close this texture stuff just to make it a little less confusing. So we've got our subtool up here, tool, subtools open, and keep dragging down, and we got masking. And since we have this as our alpha, we can say mask by alpha right here. So I'm going to click mask by alpha, and you can notice that the whole thing kind of turns a little bit darker. If you don't want to see the mask, you could turn this off, this view mask, or you can see the hotkey for that is Control H. And then if I put it on the move tool, it's going to draw a line straight out, and then click this little green manipulator here. And if I click in this middle circle and click and drag up just a little bit, you can see that it's going to raise the surface a little bit, but it doesn't look like it's masking quite so well for me. So I'm going to go back over here to the alpha. I'm just going to take this whole thing and just dock it over here real quick, and so we can modify this. So we can take the intensity of it and then take that. I'm gonna leave that. I'll try contrast. Is probably what I probably need to do, is bump that up a little bit. And from there, since we've made these changes, we're going to go to this transfer area and say make modified alpha, because we've taken the original alpha and we've modified it. So I'm going to say make modified alpha, and it's going to make a new one here like this, which is going to be right here. So then we can, after that work is done, we can go back to the masking and say mask by alpha again, and hit Control H to hide, and then I'll just put it on the move tool, and everything should be set up the way it was before. And then now I can kind of just pull this out just a little bit, and you can see I'm getting all these little different pebbles and everything that were in that visible in that texture will actually kind of show up in the sculpt now. So that might be useful for you to kind of change the actual surface of the model that you're working with based off of the texture that you're working with. And just a little bit of cleanup. So if we want to get rid of some of these textures and things, you know, when we save, we wouldn't want all these textures saved with the project. We can go to texture, and you can actually select whatever it is, that texture that you're working with, and you can say remove, and it'll actually remove that texture from the program. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping, but that's going to give you a way to go ahead and clone out any kind of area that you're working with on your texture, and then it's also going to let you kind of flood the entire texture with a foreground or background color. And then we just looked at how we can, you know, convert that texture into an alpha and then turn that into a mask and have our surface of our actual sculpt affected by what we've been painting in the color as well.